All right, well, we are just about ready to get started. Welcome and thanks for coming to the presentation. This is, we're figuring this out as we go because unfortunately Scott Seaborn, my co-presenter, could not be here in person with us, but he is calling in. So we're doing a real hybrid where even the speakers are hybrid right now. So, and just huge shout out to the AV team and to our facilitator, Scott Neems, for helping make this happen. So, welcome again, everyone, virtually and in person. My name is Allison Henry. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at UC Berkeley. And I'll let Scott introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Seaborn. I'm the Privacy Officer at UC Berkeley. I work very closely with Allison. We'll talk about all of our exciting collaborations. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. We had a family issue come up, but great to be here with all of you virtually.
Great. All right. Well, with that, I think we're ready to dive in and talk about how Scott and I partner with each other to address information risks at UC Berkeley. Here we go. So we're going to start with a polling question. We're going to try this like first from the room, and then if you want to reply in chat, the virtual folks can do that. So what is the difference between privacy and security? Who has any ideas? We'll start with the room. So just raise your hand if you have.
And there's no right answer. It's a subjective question.
Any thoughts on this? Who's sorry?
I want to say privacy is around what information is. Like basically, I want to say privacy is like the shield. And then security is like fortress.
Cool. All right. So, yes. So I heard privacy is the shield and security is the fortress.
I like that.
Interesting. Yes. Next question.
Like, is it appropriate to use? Is it right how you use it, you should use it, and then security is kind of more the protecting it and the access to it.
Cool. All right. So privacy is how you're using, and security is how you're protecting what you're using. Is that about right? Cool. Okay. Next one. Yes. Cool. So that's another point. It was that privacy is about individuals, whereas security is about the institution. Any other thoughts? And you can't have one without the other. So I think we can agree on that one. But yes.
Windows, security is the door lock.
So that was privacy is the windows and security is the door lock. Interesting. Cool. So I see one in the chat here. Security is generally composed of the CIA triad. Privacy is concerned about appropriate access to information. So CIA triad, for those of you who don't know, is the three parts of security, which is confidentiality, meaning keeping data from being seen by people who shouldn't see it. Integrity, meaning keeping data from being modified without, unauthorized modifications being changed without permission, and availability, which is like keeping data available. So when you take a system down and it's not available, that's the A part of CIA. I see another one. Privacy is the door, security is the lock. Cool. All right. Any other thoughts, Scott, on this one?
I like all of these. I typically think of privacy having to do with the decisions we make about our data and security about protecting that data, but they kind of go hand in hand. I like the door and lock analogy. I'm going to copy that. I like that one. And the shield. I'm going to get a shield and a coat of arms. That's pretty cool.
Great. All right. Well, let's dive in then. Next slide.
Oops. There we go. Did we go too far?
There we go. So I just want to share a little bit about UC Berkeley for those of you who are visiting. How many people are not from UC Berkeley here in the room right now? Cool. See, we got a few. So this is just a little bit about UC Berkeley. You can see about about the size of the institution, so that we are a very large school. You know, faculty, staff, students, and a large community here with many different uses. You know, we're a lot of research going on, a lot of instruction, similar to your own campuses, I'm sure. And we also do a lot of like really world-class research here, and very proud to be the first of the University of California and one of the top ranked, in fact, the top public institution in US News and World Report. Although apparently the folks from Oxford told me that the British press puts them above us. So I guess it depends on your perspective. All right, next slide. All right. There we go. All right. So according to the system-wide IS3 information security policy, you all know IS3, right? Okay. You can look it up if not after, it's fine. Who is responsible for security at each location? So at each UC location, who's responsible? Well, just what's the first thing you think of when you think who's responsible for? Oh, me, CISO. Okay, it's all on me. All right. Any other thoughts on this? Yes. Everybody. Very good. Everyone. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of everyone's in the chat. Yes. But who's everyone? Like, who is everyone here? Everyone in the world? Everyone on campus? There we go. So yeah, a lot of people familiar with IS3, which is great. Yes, so IS3 does define roles and responsibilities, and every member of the campus community is in there somewhere. If you're using our network, if you're using our data, if you're you know, a student taking classes, if you're a visitor connecting to the wireless network, everybody has some responsibility for information security. So a few of the critical roles, you know, the CISO was mentioned. It is in the policy that every location has to have somebody in that lead ISO or CISO role, and they all do. And then there's also the cyber risk responsible executive. So who knows who their CRE is for their location? One person does. Anybody know the CRE for Berkeley? Who is Berkeley CRE? So, sure. Anthony Joseph. Yes. So if you didn't know that, Anthony Joseph is a faculty member who has expertise in cybersecurity, and he serves as our campus CRE. Every location has a different one. But again, it's not just me and the CRE. It is everyone, including all of you. All right, let's go on. Next one. All right, I just want to talk a little bit about the Information Security Office at UC Berkeley. And so I have to give a shout out to Sharon for helping to develop our mission, vision, and values. So this was some work that we did as a unit to develop this so that we all have a common understanding about why we're here. And I'm not going to read through all of this. It is on our website, security.berkeley.edu, if you want to check it out. But I want to put it up here to emphasize that we are a mission-driven organization. We're not just here to do information security work. We're here to serve the institution. And so these are the values that drive our work. And it's not all just, you know, what can we do to make the campus safer? It's how does our work, you know, align with these values? Trust, collaboration. These are the things that really matter to us, and it definitely ties into the work we do partnering with privacy. Next slide. All right, this is, I put this in a lot of presentations. So if you've seen me present before, you've probably seen the iceberg slide. And this does go back to what you said about security being everyone's responsibility. My office does important security work. We monitor the network for threats. We respond to those threats. We you know, follow up with incidents. We do risk assessments and let you know, here are the things that are most at risk based on your system's configuration, and give you, you know, things you can do to be safer. We do identity and access management. So your CalNet login, protecting those credentials and access to systems. We develop information security policies, and we educate everyone. We do the outreach part, letting people know what those responsibilities are. But that's just a tiny part of the total work. Like all of this other stuff, actually configuring systems to be secure, putting rules into firewalls, like understanding even what policies apply, and then making sure that those controls are on those systems. That's everybody who works for the campus. That's faculty, staff, students, all of us. And that's the biggest part of the work. And so in order to be effective, we have to be able to communicate and partner. And it's just a really important part. If it's just my team, there's no way we'd have any chance of keeping systems safe here. Next slide. All right. So Scott, I think this is yours.
And we're going to talk about the privacy office and our role and the privacy culture at UC Berkeley. But before we get into that, was the polling question, kind of a trivia question. What historical events have influenced UC Berkeley's privacy culture? There's one in particular. So if you could, and also Allison, I can't see the folks there.
Yeah,
So
I'll call on folks if anyone here wants to. What events?
Excellion, it should have, that's for sure. Excellion should have.
Yes,
What's the ransomware attack?
a ransomware attack. So there was a system-wide, that's Accellion, that was a ransomware attack. There have been smaller ones at Berkeley, nothing too major, but we've definitely had our share. Yes, Siobhan.
Happened like in the 60s around faculty and academic freedom and privacy. That kind of.
Yeah, okay, so we're getting warmer here. Anyone else want to? Oh, yeah, so something that happened with the faculty back in the 60s and academic freedom. Is that ringing any bells?
It's part of the history and lore of the campus, but it might be for an older generation.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's like the further away we get from it, then, but it's amazing how the institutional memory remains. And even if the events aren't remembered, like the impact to our culture. So
I think Terry got it. The free speech movement. So, and I can't see how many of you know about the free speech movement. Maybe a show of hands, people can put in the chat.
a few, not everyone though.
This was in the 1960s. There was a lot of dissent on college campuses, especially at UC Berkeley. There was a lot of dissent about the Vietnam War and some of the political activities that were going on. And our campus leaders, both students and faculty, were concerned about surveillance. They were concerned about intervention and censorship into the academic work of folks on campus. And this actually lended itself to the development of some of our privacy policies and practices way back when. So even though this was years and years ago, our privacy culture and our policies have been heavily influenced by the free speech movement. So this first principle that's up on the screen, academic freedom, really came out of that. The freedom to engage in academic pursuits and study without intervention or censorship or surveillance from the administration, from federal agencies, from law enforcement, et cetera. Another privacy value that came about as a result of this is transparency. So there was a concern that some personal data and especially political type data was being used and we didn't know about it. So transparency about data we're collecting, how we're using it, who we're sharing it with, and when we're deleting it. Autonomy and choice. So we attempt anyway, as much as we can at the UC Berkeley campus, to provide data subjects with as much choice as we can about the data we collect about them, how we use it, who it's shared with, et cetera. And we'll talk about how we obtain consent and how we inform users about the use cases of their data and provide them a choice around it later on in this presentation. We're going to talk a lot about privacy balancing. So this is balancing security protections with the privacy rights of individuals. We're going to have a case study and scenario at the end of this presentation where you can engage in privacy balancing. But this is another example of our privacy culture and privacy values. And then data minimization. You probably heard this term before. It's really big in the HIPAA healthcare privacy world. The idea is that you only collect what you need, you only share it with those folks who have a business need to know, and you only retain it for as long as you need it. So we minimize what we collect, who it's shared with, and how long we keep it. So these values and principles have been championed by our academic senate. We actually have some of the faculty on campus who are privacy experts, kind of worldwide privacy experts on campus. one of our faculty members is now advising the White House on privacy matters, and she was instrumental in some of the more recent privacy policies and practices on campus, Deirdre Mulligan, and also our student leadership. So the ASUC and the Graduate Assembly are very active in privacy. They're participating on our Information Risk Governance Committee that Allison will talk about later, and in our Data Governance Committee, and they have a similar expectation of privacy on campus. And please feel free to put questions in as we're going. So the Privacy Office, before we get into collaboration, we want to talk about what our office does and the role of privacy here on the UC Berkeley campus. So a lot of people think of privacy and they think of FERPA, HIPAA, the Information Practices Act, the General Data Protection Regulation, all these privacy laws. And that is a big part of what we do. It's not all of what we do. We don't limit ourselves to protections that are required by law or regulation, but we do spend a lot of time on it. And I can't see, but how many folks have heard of FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act? Hopefully somebody, yeah, I got some hands in the chat, good. So FERPA governs student data. The registrar on our campus is actually our FERPA official, but we work closely with the registrar's office at the privacy office, working on policies, procedures, what's considered directory information under FERPA, when information can be disclosed to third parties, things like that. We also are a HIPAA covered entity. A lot of people don't think that UC Berkeley, because it doesn't have a medical center, is actually covered under HIPAA, but we do have our School of Optometry Clinic, which is actually one of the largest optometry clinics, I think the largest on the West Coast, and they have lots and lots of HIPAA data. Our UHS, or University Health Services, does have some HIPAA protected data, so we do enforce HIPAA as well. We work with the General Data Protection Regulation. I mentioned that. GDPR. Has anyone heard of GDPR? Some more hands?
Yep.
Yeah, it was big in the privacy world, especially in the late 2010s or 20-teens, whatever they're called. In 2018, when when the law went into effect, kind of changed the landscape of privacy internationally. It put more rights in the hands of individuals and away from institutions. And we are the enforcement entity on campus for GDPR. There's another privacy law called the Personal Information Protection Law, or PIPL. Actually, if I was there, I'd give you a candy bar if you know about PIPL. Anyone know about PIPL? Any new hands in the chat? That's a Chinese privacy law. It's very stringent. It's actually more stringent than the GDPR. And we are just now coming up with a compliance regime with the Privacy Office for PIPL, or PIPL, as some people call it. And then we have the Information Practices Act, which is a California state law from the 1970s that was actually very forward-thinking. It guarantees individuals in California who have their data collected by public sector organizations like UC, it guarantees them similar rights to those that are guaranteed to European persons under GDPR. Not all of the rights, but it was a pretty good start for back in the 70s. So we do work a lot on regulation. We work a lot on policy. We're helping to develop a new FERPA policy right now. We have an advisory role, so we advise campus departments on best practices. We spend a lot of time reviewing vendor agreements. I know Allison can relate to this. We review vendor agreements from a privacy standpoint. They review agreements from a security standpoint. We work with researchers. We'll talk about how we work with researchers in a little bit. And we review new technologies. So for example, our artificial intelligence, we're just now starting to review the privacy implications of AI and generative AI. We've got some help from the folks on this call as well in doing that. We have an active partnership with security. These are some of the areas, some of the many areas that we partner with Allison's team on. Governance. Allison will talk about some of the committees we work on, research support, third-party assessments. So we talked about vendor agreements, but it's not just that. It's new technologies. Anytime we're sharing data with an academic partner, another institution, we review those agreements as well. Data use agreements, things like that. Incident response. So we do have some incidents here at UC Berkeley. Not all of them are our incidents. Some of them are system-wide. Some of them are from third-party vendors, but that takes up a lot of our time as well. And then check-ins. We meet regularly. We'll talk about some of our meetings and how we maintain an open line of communication, but it's very important. I would encourage you to get to know your privacy officer on your campus, get to know your security officer. And if you are the security officer, you don't know who your privacy officer is, don't admit that, but please get to know them. I'll turn it back over to Allison.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about governance. So we'll start with governance. At UC Berkeley, we have the Information Risk Governance Committee. And this had started, like the beginnings of it started like really with the start of information security being a thing that people even cared about. And so with this new technology, IDS, monitoring of the network. And this was something that was developed very heavily at Berkeley with the BRO project. So they could monitor the network, they could see if a system was compromised, but what they couldn't do is keep it from happening. There were no standards about, what could and couldn't be connected. There was no responsibility for like removing threats from our network or protecting assets on the network. And as we began to find these threats and realized that, hackers were breaking into systems, there was a need to have some level of control over that. And so there were the security working group. This was like the first attempt at this back in 1998. And then we moved on from there to the Campus Information Security Committee, or CISC. And this was a little g governance, meaning this was like more of an informal group. It's like we need stakeholders from across the campus to help advise us on what we need to do for information security. So they kind of got together and chatted about stuff, and included faculty even from the earliest days. By 2014, we really needed something more robust than that. And so that's when our privacy officer at the time and our CISO at the time, it was not Scott and I, this was several iterations ago, formed this Information Risk Governance Committee. So this is a formal big G governance committee that operates under our campus enterprise risk management program. And it does include still faculty, the heads of large administrative units who either go themselves or send a representative. Scott and I still co-chair it, just as the security and privacy officer did from the beginning. And we talk about like a lot of different issues in addressing information risk, but one of the big ones, and we're going to talk through an example of that later, is how to balance security and privacy concerns in our monitoring programs, so that what we're doing for security aligns with our campus privacy values. And that's one of the big benefits of this committee. Because these issues are technically very complex, and again, these are executive level people who are serving on the committee who don't necessarily have a technical background. There's a working group, which is called the CISPC, and they will do analysis between the IRGC meetings and then come up with recommendations and work products that they send to the committee so that these decisions can be made. Anything else on IRGC, Scott, that I missed?
No, I'll just say that the Information Risk Governance Committee is technically a requirement under our system-wide privacy policies. We're supposed to have a privacy board and information risk governance board. So hopefully your campus has one. If it doesn't, you should talk to your privacy folks.
All right, next slide. All right, so vendor risk assessments. Who here has been involved in any level of vendor risk assessment? A few people. Okay, so the pain. This is very, very difficult. And so that's why partnering with, not just Scott, but with the accessibility office as well is really, really important to make sure that we're supporting each other and getting all the bases covered. We definitely do vendor risk assessments. We have a threshold, a risk threshold. So if it's what we call high risk P3 and higher, we do a full vendor risk assessment. We review the terms in the Appendix DS. Scott has a program for doing that privacy practices in the contracts and assessing whether that we have the right protections in our contract language to address privacy. Like, are they taking our data and selling it to whoever they want? So we need to make sure our contracts have guarantees on information security and also what they're doing with our data and privacy, and that aligns with what our values are. And then also data classification is really important for this vendor risk assessment, and it isn't always clear when somebody's buying something exactly how it's going to be used and what level of data is going into it. So Scott does a lot of work with us, partnering with us in figuring out like what is the actual data protection level here so that we can get the right terms in. And then the accessibility office also, we let them know that we've got these contracts we've been reviewing. Hey, have they reached out to you? And make sure that they get in the loop too, in making sure the products that we're buying meet our accessibility standards. Next. Incident response. So this is a big one where we partner very closely together, and it's not just the two of us, but there's a whole team of folks on campus. I have some of the roles there, and you might recognize this from your own incident response plans. From our side, the security team is really focused on the technical work, like what was exposed, how did they get in, are we containing everything, is there still, have we eradicated the attackers from our network? Is there a corrective action plan? We make sure the incident response protocol is being followed, the right people are being notified. And then on Scott's side, once we get to that level and we've convened this executive incident response team and we're meeting, then Scott takes on things like, what are the regulatory compliance requirements here? Are there government agencies that need to be notified? Are there other stakeholders that need to be notified? And what's the time frame? Sometimes it's real short, like we have 48 hours to tell them that something happened. When it comes to like whether we should notify affected individuals, there's legal concerns for that, but then there's also we might want to notify affected individuals, if not required by law. And so Scott plays a big role in figuring that out, in partnership with these other groups. And then, what kind of, if this is a privacy incident, like somebody's private information was exposed, then, what's our obligation to let people know, and what can we do to help protect them in those situations? Right, next slide. Right. So Scott.
So one of the areas we collaborate on heavily, and not just privacy and security, but the research IT team as well, and the Center for the Protection of Human Subjects, is on research privacy and research security. Allison mentioned data classification. This comes up all the time with our principal investigators. They have this data set. It's coming from maybe a federal funding agency, or it's coming from another institution, or maybe it's coming from a healthcare provider. And they know they need to protect it, but they don't know what sort of protections they need. So my role in that is determining the data classification level or the protection level. I hope everyone knows about our data classification standards, P1 through P4. Maybe we get some hands for that. If you don't, we can provide a link for it as well. Awesome. Got some people that are very familiar with our standard. So we decide on the classification based on the characteristics of the data. Sometimes maybe the data requires a notification to the data subject, or maybe to federal agencies or state agencies if there's a breach. Maybe the systems, if they're impacted, could shut down our network or have a catastrophic effect on our functioning as a campus. So those kinds of things would be P4 data, and it goes all the way down to P1, which is publicly available data. So we help our researchers determine if their data needs to be protected and at what level. We also work on de-identification. So a lot of times we'll have a data set, maybe it's, like I said, health data, or maybe it's data from an elementary school or a prison. And the PI will say, PI's principal investigator will say, oh, I took all the names out. I took all the medical record numbers and names, addresses, things like that out. And they'll say it's de-identified. So it doesn't have to go through the institutional review board. It's not human subjects research. But they bring it to us. I'm thankful they bring it to us. And we look at the data set and we compare it with data that's available publicly. So can we take this data set and use it to use publicly available information to re-identify the data subjects? And many times we can. So we work with them on removing enough data or suppressing enough data to make sure that it's de-identified. We do work on regulatory compliance. Like I mentioned, the laws and regulations that we work on, but it's not just laws and regulations. A lot of the federal funding agencies have special requirements for their data sets. So for example, Department of Defense, Energy, the Health and Human Services agencies and administrations like NIH, CMS, and the FDA. There's a presidential memorandum now that has specific requirements for security and privacy. So we help our researchers comply with those special requirements for their funders. Oops, I went too far. Let's see. We mentioned our regular check-ins. I can't stress this enough. It's really important to have an open line of communication between privacy and security, and also between privacy, security, and accessibility. Allison mentioned that when we do our vendor assessments, it's privacy, it's security, and it's accessibility. And if it doesn't pass one of the three, it shouldn't go forward. That's kind of how we operate. But it's really important to have an open line of communication. These are the various committees that Allison talked about. But we also just meet regularly. We have meetings every other week, and I probably talk to Allison and Allison's team almost every other day. So there's always something going on in privacy and security. So we have another polling question. This is kind of leading into our privacy balancing activity. You can tell by the question, but I'll read it out and then you can provide responses. So the question is, to what extent do you agree with this statement? We should consider restricting our monitoring programs to protect individual privacy even if some utility for security is lost. So do we limit our security controls to protect privacy? That's the question.
Any thoughts on this? I want to contribute. Yes.
I'm not gonna place semantics to say, "Of course you should consider it." But no, I think that it actually is.
So I'm not going to play semantics with your question, because of course we should consider it, but no, I actually think that it is important to weigh that and keep that in balance. And that's one of the reasons I like working for UC.
Cool.
Great answer.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
other folks have an opinion on that? It's sort of like a leading question, like, but
I say it's a trick question. It's really a risk management and risk assessment. And you have to examine what the tolerance and risk is in each individual one.
Yeah, so it was said that this is a risk management question and that we have to examine what our tolerance to risk is. And it absolutely right on that. And there's different risks. There's the risk of, attackers breaking into our system. There's also the risk of data that we collect being used in a way that we didn't intend, whether from a nefarious party or from some other source. And we can talk a little bit more about how that might happen too. You certainly can't lose data you're not collecting. So anytime you collect data, there is some risk, and it's balancing that with the value of that data that you're collecting.
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely risk management and developing risk tolerance. A lot of what we do. And I like the answer that Cecilia put in the chat. It depends. That's absolutely right. It depends on the specifics of the situation.
I know that a lot of military students do not want to be part of the data set. I know that a lot of military students do not want to be part of the data set because of, their military background and what have you. So we've run into that every once in a while. So yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, we've had situations where certain data sets, if they're exposed to, for example, a student's parents, they might not want that data to get in the hands of their parents because it's something maybe their parents don't know about them, but military would be a similar situation.
Okay. Did you have a?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess,
You got the microphone. There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's definitely everything that's been said. I don't want to repeat. So what I'll add to is it's important to identify what your goal is, what you're trying to accomplish, and the means to get to that goal without compromising individual freedom or individual intellectual property or privacy for an individual is really important, because your goals may be, lofty, really good goals that you have to implement a new functionality, but at what cost? So it goes back to everything everyone said, but I would ask, what is the cost of what you're trying to do?
All right, great. Well, we are going to dive into exactly how we accomplish exactly that. So go for it.
All right, so we're going to engage in a privacy balancing analysis with all of you. And just to describe what it is, we do have a link to our balancing tool that will be in the slide so you can take it home. But the objective of the analysis is to analyze new projects and weigh security needs against privacy protection. So kind of what we've been talking about. The methodology that we use here at UC Berkeley, we have a committee, the CISPC that Allison mentioned. I think I've got an extra C on there, but it's a privacy and security committee, not committee. They review proposals, usually by the Information Security Office. Sometimes they come from other areas on campus. We had one during the COVID era where a department wanted to find out how many people were in their building, for density monitoring purposes, and they wanted to use Wi-Fi data for that. So it didn't come from the security office, it came from a department, but we did use a privacy balancing analysis on that project. The key considerations or questions that usually come up that we ask about the project are, does the tool accomplish a business objective? Does this really do what we want it to, or does it accomplish what we want, especially if it involves something that's detrimental to an individual's privacy? What elements of personal information are collected? So this is very important. If you don't, as Allison mentioned, if you don't collect the data, you don't necessarily need to worry about it being breached or a privacy issue, but if you collect it and it's shared with a third party, sometimes you need to worry about that. Are there less intrusive alternatives? This is really kind of where we get into mitigation and controls that protect privacy, but still allow us to accomplish our objective. Is there another way to do this? Can we de-identify the data before it's used, or can we allow users to opt out of something, for example? What's the privacy impact? Is this really sensitive data? Are we talking about social security numbers? Are we talking about, Title IX or SVSH data or something that's super sensitive? And how can we mitigate those privacy implications? So that's kind of the process we engage in. We ask a lot of questions. We have multiple meetings. We fill out a template. It's actually kind of an exciting process. It may not sound as exciting we're talking about it, but when we go through it, you'll see. it's kind of an exciting way to analyze the situation. So this is the case study we're going to walk through. Your information security office proposes to use a new data loss prevention tool, DLP, and we'll talk about what that is. It will identify sensitive data as it leaves your secure IT environment, but will potentially allow the security office staff and a vendor to view user emails and content. So we're going to consider the following questions, and hopefully we can consider this as a group. So, what's the purpose of this? Is it useful? Does it actually accomplish what it's supposed to? Are there less intrusive alternatives? What are the specific data elements that are collected? And what's the overall privacy impact? Is there a potential for abuse? Can we have folks opt out of this? And what sort of privacy mitigations or controls could ensure that the tool doesn't infringe on privacy rights? So we're going to do this together. We do have a slide that talks about some of the potential privacy issues. So for email metadata, for example, the data will be retained for a year. That could be problematic. Email content will be scanned locally and compared to signatures, or content not sent to a central console. The security policy data elements will trigger an action, if any, will be logged to a central console retained for a year, and there will be audit logs. So this talks about the practice that we're going to review. Now we're getting into the analysis. So we're going to ask all of you to describe the privacy impact and potential privacy harms to those being monitored due to the collection and retention of data. And the data we're talking about is email and metadata about email. So any thoughts?
Yeah, so just think about getting that list of the email elements that would be exposed, how long they'd be exposed for, who would have access to them. What are your thoughts about what's the potential privacy harms that could come from that? Any thoughts here?
What kind of data is transmitted via email? Anything sensitive?
Yes.
Just going to ask, anybody didn't ask to sign and say, yes, you can look at my data, or any of these, because if they haven't, then throw this away.
So there was whether any people gave their consent, whether they signed off saying it's okay for you to look at my email to help keep me safe.
And I'm sorry, we're going to show this previous slide. There was a question. Thank you, Jenny, in the chat. This talks about the data that's involved and how it's going to be used.
Yeah, we could leave that up while we take this. Yes, in the back.
Talking about personal emails, like people logging into the Wi-Fi on campus with the personal emails, or is this just like a UC Berkeley.edu email?
Good. So this would be Berkeley.edu, including students, so not just faculty and staff. Let's just say any emails going through Berkeley.edu, including, in and outbound. So somebody from outside sends an inbound email to a Berkeley.edu address, and it would have this DLP. So, and just a little bit like, if you picture how something like this might work, is you go to send an email and you say, oh, thanks, here's my password so you can fix this account problem for me, or here's my social security number so you can fix my paycheck. Then what it would do is pop something up saying, are you sure you want to do that? Maybe not. Or would you like to send that encrypted instead? So it would intercept somebody's attempt to send data matching these signatures out.
It might involve a vendor accessing that information and potentially someone working in the security office. And we got some really good information in the chat. Yeah, health information, definitely. Financial information, a lot of sensitive data.
Yep.
That goes through
Immigration status.
Yes, this is for Berkeley.edu email. And I think in the interest of time, we're going to need to just dive in here.
Okay.
There we go. Great. So let's think about this potential privacy impacts. So first of all, anybody who's one of these IT staff people who has access to the console could see the metadata. Remember, the actual information that triggered the alert is not being sent to the console, but the metadata is who you were emailing, how big the message was, what time it was, and the subject line are all in the console. That could be a lot of IT people, especially if you have people, say, for multiple distributed departments, and they all get to log into the console and see all that data. So the other thing is, suppose it's in the console that you tried to send 15 emails with social security numbers. Then could that subject you to some sort of HR disciplinary action? Like, why are you doing that? You know, that's against policy. And so somebody could, you know, have some kind of HR problem because of that. The other thing is that, remember, we said it triggers on rules. Some of these rules are supplied by the vendor, but these IT staff can also make their own rules. So maybe one of these people, you know, has a grudge against somebody and they're like, I want to see every email that has this person's name in it. They could potentially put in these kind of rules, and that could, you know, expose privacy, have privacy implications. So here's the other thing is that, again, you can't lose or expose data you don't collect. Once we start collecting this data, it's always possible we could get a subpoena and that some court wants to see it as part of some legal action. It could be subject to a PRA request. And so public records, we're public employees. They want to know how many Berkeley people, you know, sent emails to certain people. Like, there's all sorts of ways that legally somebody could try and get access to this data. If we say, sorry, we don't collect it, then, you know, no problem there.
I know
All right.
we're running short on time. Let's get into our alternative means to accomplish the same objective. Any ways to do this without using DLP to capture emails?
Well, if the tool is meant to prevent like information being sent to email, it could be like a client side tool or something like that that doesn't process through the
Yep.
system that retains data. Right?
Yeah, so that's
Analyzing the subject text, say social
Right.
security number, hey, you want to do that? It's all local. The users.
So that was a good one, to run this all locally on the computer with a client-based agent that doesn't send data to the console. So if it's just to inform the user that they may have done something wrong and not to collect it at some central place where other people can look at it.
And that is how some of them are configured. In the chat, it says retire email. So I like that one. Is the same way it's intercepted and the info is erased, like social security numbers. You could do the same thing for the addresses. True.
That's true.
So I'll
Right.
show you some of the things that we had, but these are some of many ideas. So
Yes.
just training users about not sharing data externally outside of our secure environment. But as Allison pointed out on the slide, it's not always effective. Warn only without logging. I think that's similar to the comment in the chat. So we would warn people, like, do you really want to do this? But we won't actually send it to the central console. Encryption without data detection. This is another, like, some of our encrypted email services do this. They just encrypt that transmission. Requires some training, but there's minimal privacy impact. Any other thoughts? I know we have a couple minutes. In the chat, it says, I guess it's a question, how can you see employers require non-disclosure from IT employees who may encounter sensitive information? Do ISO staff, for example, have to agree to non-disclosure? That's a great question. Is there a confidentiality agreement or something like that for ISO staff? I think that, Allison, that's a question for you.
Yeah, so, you know, as UC employees, we are required just under policies that we only use institutional information for the purpose for which it was intended. We can't divulge it to third parties without permission any more than our vendors that we require of our vendors. We have to, you know, comport ourselves with integrity. We do have a data access agreement that we, you know, use internally within ISO, and sometimes in addition to just institutional policies, it's a good thing to have that when you're giving somebody access to information. We also do the FERPA training, just like, you know, we have access to student information, so we have to do the FERPA training like everyone else. So yeah, you can't just, you know, we have like least perusal, which means you only look at something if you have a need to look at it. And then, yeah, not only using it and sharing it as a business need to know, and not just because you like to chat with your friends about what other people are doing. Okay, one more, yes.
It does remind me that, you know, that does rely on trust from the admin's perspective, right? And there's a class action lawsuit right now against a car company that they were sharing
there was a car company that they trusted these people to go through the video logs so they could make their product better. And they're suing the company now for sending out all the information and to their friends over
Yep.
Slack or, and so there is an inherent trust with the people that manage that data. And I like your idea of if you're not collecting it, you can't share it and you have a rule to follow. But who's to say that everyone always follows the rules?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, hopefully
Well-
everyone here does, but we have some controls in place. Any final questions? And I know we have a minute left. I just put up the slide with our emails. You can reach out to us. Actually, these are not our emails. These are our websites. I'll put
We're
the
not
email
hard
in
to
the,
find though.
in the
Don't worry.
chat.
Very easy
sorry
to
about
find.
that.
Yeah, and please do, like, I know we're low on time, but if you have other questions, please do reach out to us. Happy to answer. All right, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everybody remotely.